All right, everybody. Seahawks game coming up in not too long here, but I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and get the final word in on these 2023 Mariners. Actually, went to the game yesterday, so I guess I'm a little more qualified than usual to speak about this team because I watched them in person for the 162nd game. So, Mariners season ended yesterday. They go 88-74. Technically, they fall one game short of the playoffs, although we all know that if Toronto needed to win yesterday, they probably would have. They rested their starters, they didn't play Gaussman. So realistically, it was two games. So we needed to win 90 games, which is where we got the previous two seasons, and we couldn't do it. And big picture, just to talk about this team in general, this result, this outcome to the 2023 season, it's not okay. Point blank, period. What happened this season was not okay. That this team was unable to improve on last season's record or let alone the previous season's record is a travesty. And I understand that the team the last 2 years overachieved, but this team was better in terms of the makeup of the roster and the players they got to play by, I would say, a pretty good margin over the last two seasons. So for us to finish 88-74 is not okay. So, point blank, period, this team got a full season of Luis Castillo, which they did not have either of the previous two seasons. They had a full, uninhibited by any kind of an innings limit season from Logan Gilbert. They got a full season, even though he ran out of gas at the end, from George Kirby. They had a career year from J.P. Crawford. They had so many guys playing in the rough general primes of their career that this team could not build on what they did in 2022 and 2021 is not okay. Unacceptable. And this represents a failure. We didn't have a bad season. In fact, by objective standards, in a vacuum, it's a good season. This was a pretty good team. But the fact that this team was worse by record than last season is really not okay. Because everything was set up for this year to be special, and I don't know what we do for 2024. So, the last 10 games, I mean, I already kind of made a video talking about it. Really, really unacceptably bad efforts in some of those games, getting dog walked by Justin Verlander with the season on the line. Luis Castillo has his worst start in like 4.5 years in the must win game a couple days ago. Some bad stuff. But at the end of the day, every single game we played this season means just as much as every other game. And we can say that now safely because we didn't make the playoffs. If we made the playoffs, yeah, those games you'd look at and say, hey, we need to evaluate these games a lot more than the other games. But at the end of the day, every game we played this year had equal importance because we didn't make it. So evaluating the season as a whole and the team as a whole, there was some good stuff. Starting with the batters, starting with the position players, I do want to give a shout out to a few guys. There were some positive things here. I want to give a big shout out, especially to J.P. Crawford, who completely reinvented himself as a really good leadoff hitter. Somebody with power, somebody who could hit for average, somebody who could work counts, draw walks, avoid massive amounts of strikeouts on a team that loved to strike out more than pretty much any other team in the league. And really just turn in this remarkable season. I don't know if he's going to win a gold glove, but his defense was better. And what he did at the plate this year was amazing. And it really does disgust me that we weren't able to turn that into a playoff berth. He improves his play by that much, comes through in the clutch that many times, multiple grand slams, bases loaded monster, runners in scoring position monster, and we can't do anything with it. It sucks. But J.P. Crawford, he he did everything for us this year. I want to give a shout out to Cal Riley. He proved that last year was not just a fluke. And honestly, he is in the conversation for best catcher in the league. He led the league among all catchers in home runs and throwouts from behind the plate. So Cal Riley has become a borderline superstar at catcher. So shout out to him. I want to give a shout out to a couple of the role players, guys like Tom Murphy, who played really well when he was healthy, Mike Ford, who actually provided us a little bit of a boost, and Jared Kelnick. I know that we're not exactly on the greatest of terms with him right now because of what he did to cut his season relatively short, but he proved he is a good MLB player. So going forward, you've got a respectable foundation of guys who are either young or in their primes, with Julio, 22 years old, Jared Kelnick, 23 years old, Cal Raleigh, 26, and J.P. Crawford, 28. That's like your core. That's like your setup of guys that you're going to build your team around going forward. Now, we do have some role players. Like, I think Josh Rojas was great for us. I loved what Rojas did for us ever since that trade. He made that trade go. He made that trade work. He provided a lot of quality at bats and was a good stand-in at second base, which has been a position where the Mariners have just not been able to get anything reliable going over there. So you've got Rojas going forward. You can probably platoon him with Cabby, who obviously his bat cooled off dramatically as the season went on, but he's still somebody that is really good at annoying opposing pitchers. He's a great base runner, capable on defense. So the second base position has actually been kind of addressed, which, hey, given how bad the Colton Wong experiment went, I'm going to be pretty happy with that. But what else do we have? Teoscar's probably gone. I don't think we're going to bring back Teoscar. And honestly, if we did bring him back, you'd probably just want him to be a DH, but I don't think we can bring him back. Suarez clearly took a step back with the bat this year. He didn't hit for as much power. His average wasn't particularly high to make up for it. He was an average hitter who strikes out a ton. So Suarez, if he's just going to keep getting older, like he was 31 this year, is it going to be worse next year? I know he's good in the field, but at a certain point, what he does at third base is not necessarily going to make up for what he's not giving you at the plate. Last year, he was a well above average hitter. He was a good hitter. This year, he was flat average. Where is this going next year? So I know we're probably stuck with him, but we at the very least need to get some kind of depth going at third base to where Suarez doesn't have to play every single game. What do we have with Ty France, a guy who I'm pretty much done with? Now, I know JP said he's going to work with him at Driveline trying to fix his swing because that's what got JP over the hump to become a great hitter this year. Maybe Ty France can have a career revival courtesy of that, but we can't depend on it. The guy, like Ty France, went from maybe our most reliable hitter to our most unreliable hitter like that. And for most of this season, he just gave us nothing. We're talking about a hitter with zero power and zero speed. What does that give you? That gives you a guy who can't really do much of anything. He can't hit for extra bases, really. He's not really an extra base hitter anymore. He's a singles hitter with zero speed. Add that together, what do you get? You get Ty France, a below average player in pretty much every respect, capable in the field, and all I can say is it's a good thing we haven't paid that guy yet. So I don't know what we have there. So do we need a new third baseman and a new first baseman? What are we going to do in left field? Because I assume Kelnick's going to move over to right field. Left field, are you going to go with Canzone and his very suspect defense? Are you going to be able to fix Canzone's swing? Because after starting out pretty good for the Mariners, Canzone basically went on a milk carton for most of the season. Haggerty We saw him revert back to the mean more or less this season, I think. He just doesn't have the swing to be a guy you play more than every now and then. And realistically, he's probably just a pinch runner most of the time. Is Cade Marlowe going to be a long-term solution? His defense is pretty good, but the sample size of at-bats, I don't think it's enough for us to safely conclude that this guy's going to be a part of the core going forward. And then you really just don't have a lot going on here. Tom Murphy is getting older as well, and he already had an injury-riddled season where he just never got his way back from a hand injury or a finger. What was it, a wrist? So you're going to need a backup catcher, and maybe it can be Luis Torrens. Maybe that's fine. He actually played decently when he got back to the Mariners, but we're going to need to think about that. We're going to need to think about guys like Dylan Moore. We're going to have to think about guys like Taylor Trammell if he's going to be healthy next year. We're going to have to start thinking about these guys, trying to figure out, okay, are any of these guys going to become anything notable, anything that inspires confidence? Like Dylan Moore can hit for a little bit of power, but he's batting almost sub 200 this year. Do we need to do better than that? He's a utility player. I understand he has value, but I'm just mashing all this stuff together, and I'm like, okay, we're good at catcher, shortstop. I'm happy at second base. Center and right field is fine. So we're going to have to figure out what we're doing in left field. First base, if it's going to be France, then that's really uncomfortable. If it's going to be Canzone, then he needs to fix his swing this offseason because something funky happened to it. And then you've got to think about third base. Is Suarez got one decent year left in him? It's just tough. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done this offseason. But if you bring back all the same guys, if you just bring back France and you bring back Suarez and you bring back, well, I'm not going to say Teoscar because I think he's just gone. Bring back Mike Ford, bring back Dylan Moore. There's no way Mariners fans are going to be able to go into the season feeling all that good about anything. So I'm just looking at this array of hitters, and I see a pretty good core here. I know Julio had major issues coming through in the clutch at home. I know his home road splits were bizarre. Like he was amazing on the road and terrible at home. But he'll figure that out. He's 22. I'm not that worried about it. He still had a really nice season. Hit for power, stole a lot of bases, did a lot of really good things. Might win a Gold Glove this year. Kelnick, I know his bat is not great. At this point, he's probably just going to be a little bit above average, maybe a decent hitter. But he's excellent in the field. He's excellent on the base paths. He's a good MLB player. He adds value to this team. I like those guys. I believe in those guys. I believe in Crawford. I believe in Cal. But that's not going to be enough. We're going to have to do some work here to field a true, full lineup. A lineup that can withstand an injury or two. A lineup that can withstand a swoon from a player or two, because we have a lot of players on this team that go through bad stretches because they strike out so much. Even Julio. You gotta say, the guy is striking out a lot right now, and that's probably just part of who he is. He swings hard. Sometimes he hits it hard, but sometimes he goes through these phases where he can't even make contact, and he's swinging at terrible pitches. Cal, probably always going to be a guy who strikes out a lot. Now, we need to change our organizational holistic hitting strategy because it doesn't work anymore. This idea of we don't care about strikeouts, we just want to hit home runs and work pitch counts doesn't really work the way that it used to. At the end of the day, you can get the starter out of the game early, but these bullpens, it's not like it used to be. Every bullpen pitcher now is too capable to just say, oh, we're going to get the bullpen guy in the game and then we're just going to wreck shop. So the approach needs to change, especially given that we play half our games in Seattle with the Marine layer, where a lot of these power guys lose their home runs because of the conditions. So we need to change our approach here, not try to swing for the fences so much, not say it's okay to strike out 4 times a game. That's the main thing that I'm thinking about here. So the foundation is pretty solid. I like a couple of the role players here, like Rojas and Cabby can be a second base platoon. but there's work that needs to be done and not a lot to get this offseason. Pitching staff, hey, there's positive stuff here as well. George Kirby, fantastic second year. Love what he did. I know he ran out of gas at the end, but he's 25 years old. This is his first full year in the majors. What do you expect? He pitched phenomenally well. I went to a couple games this year, and both times he was amazing. He was incredible. My parents went to the game where he pitched the 9 inning shutout and still couldn't get the win. Just a very special young pitcher we're dealing with here. I don't think we understand how special. He had to lose control at the end of the season, like the last month, just to get to 19 batters walked on the season. That's how good this guy was. Logan Gilbert, first full uninhibited season. Solid, not elite, but definitely an above average pitcher. Definitely a quality number 3 guy. I'm really happy for him. I'm really proud of him. Very few bad starts. He was, generally speaking, very solid. He gave us a chance to win in most of his outings. Bryce Miller and Brian Wu forced into an expanded role because of injuries this year. It was probably not what they were expecting. It was not what we were expecting. Both those guys were serviceable. Wu and Miller, I know that they had bad games. I know that they had bad moments. But overall, you would definitely take what they gave you as rookies. So, huge shout out to those guys for giving us close to average level pitching as our fourth and fifth guys when we thought they were barely going to have to play this year, probably. All these guys get hurt. Robbie Ray, Marco Gonzalez, Hancock, Emerson Hancock. And Miller and Wu pitched pretty close to as well as you could have hoped those guys would have pitched. I will say, I wish we had Robbie Ray. He could have eaten innings at the very least. He probably would have been about average as a pitcher. Would have been a little bit better than what we got out of Miller and Wu. Definitely would have been better than the little bit we got out of Marco, because Marco really didn't pitch that well when he was in this year. And I do think that Robbie Ray probably gets us to the playoffs just because he eases the load a little bit on some of these guys that ran out of gas at the end of the season. But the guys that we had fought heroically. And I also want to give it up to Matt Brash, who recovered from a really rough start to have an incredible season out of the pen. He is a special, special talent. I know it's scary. I know it's frustrating. But that guy is special. That guy, the stuff that he does is absolutely nasty. And I'm really happy to have him in my bullpen as a Mariner. I want to give it up to guys like Topa and Spear. Both those guys I really wasn't expecting much from this year, and they both pitched relatively well. I know that there were some ups and downs, especially with Spear, but in a bullpen that was challenged this year because we lost some guys. We had to make the Sewell trade, or excuse me, the Sewell trade. They fought through and ended up having respectable seasons, especially Topa. Topa actually had a remarkable season out of the pen. Munoz, inconsistent, but overall, really good work from the pen. I know that there were some bad moments. I know that he lost control at times, really frustrating attempts to close games at times, but overall, the body of work was quite solid, and we got supplementary things from other guys that you would not have expected would have needed to chip in this year. Saucedo was respectable. Campbell was actually really good. Thornton was remarkable in many ways. So the fact that this team is able to dig deep into their bullpen reserves like this year after year after year and continually get quality things out of pretty much everybody they give the ball to, that's a credit to the organization. And that's one area I can't take anything away from them. So, hey, it wasn't the bullpen that we had last year, but given the fact that we lost some guys to injury, like Murphy, who I do think was going to have a pretty good season before he went down, off to a really good start anyway, and the fact that we had to trade Sewell to get some bats at the deadline, I I can't say too much bad about him. Yes, there were blown games, but you're going to blow games when you're having this many close games because your offense just isn't scoring runs. Now, Obviously, nothing's going to happen with Castillo. And overall, Castillo had a really good year. He was our best starting pitcher. Objectively speaking, Luis Castillo was our best starting pitcher this season. Obviously, there's a very, very bad taste in our mouths about this guy going into the offseason. Completely deserved, completely understood. He didn't pitch well in either of his last two starts when we needed the wins. He actually pitched very poorly in both of those starts. And there were other moments this season where he did not look like an ace. He did not look like a superstar. He did not look like one of the five best pitchers in the league or maybe even the American League. And overall, I think some people are a little disappointed with what he did in his first full year as a Mariner. And I can say this, going forward, it would not surprise me if George Kirby became the best pitcher on this team. If Kirby is the ace next year or the year after, I won't be surprised. And for Castillo to be that bad in the two most big important starts of the year is troubling. So yeah, I'm not happy with him either. But at the end of the day, I can't ignore the fact that he pitched really well this year. ERA of 3.34. He had a lot of starts where he got no run support. There was a long stretch of games in the middle of the season where Castillo would go out and pitch excellently and get no help and still eat the loss or no decision. And hard for me to really criticize him too much for that. I can't really get on him too much for that. So the rotation looks good going forward. We've got Castillo locked up on that contract, which, I mean, it's a lot of money, but if you compare it to other supposed aces out there, Castillo, we got him for a good price. Kirby on the rookie deal, Gilbert on the rookie deal, Miller and Wu should only get better as time goes by. Eventually, we're going to get Robbie Ray back. Eventually, we're going to get Hancock back, although I don't know if we can depend on him for much going forward because he gets hurt too much. And that part of the team is in pretty good hands. I wish that Castillo was a little better than he was. I wish he didn't wear down at the end of the season and become somebody who was really struggle bussing through those games. Put away pitches were weak, couldn't generate swings and misses. I understand all that. But a lot of teams would give a lot to have our rotation. I believe that. So that stuff is looking good. Bullpen wise, I don't know. I don't know how much we trust these guys. Like, Trent Thornton had incredible numbers out of the pen this year. Isaiah Campbell had really good numbers out of the pen this year. Do we trust those guys? I don't know. That's the hard part that I'm trying to figure out here. I know who we trust on this team. We trust Brash, we trust Munoz, and we trust Topa. I'd like to know if they trust guys like Campbell and Thornton to get big outs. What about Murphy when he gets back? His numbers were great, but does this team trust him to get big outs in big situations? If they don't, then they're probably going to have to go out and get somebody who is trustworthy and reliable. Like, they can't keep bargain basement hunting bullpen guys and just hoping it works out, because sometimes, yeah, it works out, but sometimes you end up with a guy like a Ty Adcock who gives you like two good games and then he melts and you can never play him again. Sometimes it goes like the way of Luke Weaver, who was a complete mess when we tried to integrate him into the pen. So that's the team. It's not terrible, but there's work that needs to be done. And is this the team? Is this the ownership? Is this the manager that can get that work done? Right? Is this going to be is this team in a position to actually make those things happen? More on that in a couple of minutes here. Scott Service, I don't know. I don't know what to think right now. I thought that Scott Service did a great job in 2022 and 2021. The team overachieved both those years. They weren't that good. He made them better than they were by making really good decisions with the bullpen, really good decisions with when to take out a pitcher and when to leave a pitcher in. And we overachieved massively in close games and extra innings games. But this year, we were terrible in close games. We were terrible in extra innings. And it seemed like every week he was making at least one really, really bad decision. Leaving this pitcher in, putting this pitcher in this situation, putting in this pitcher instead of that pitcher, not pinch hitting, not pinch running. Just really nonsensical stuff. And I know we're not putting him in a great position because we're not giving him great stuff to work with, but at a certain point down the home stretch of this season, when the team is struggling mightily in September, all they need to do is win a few games and they can't get it done. At what point do you go, you know what? I can't keep putting Ty France out there. He just can't do anything. They're it's like they're intentionally feeding him meatballs and he can't hit anything out of the park. A lot of these pitches that Ty France fouls off or grounds into a double play on, Mike Ford would be putting them 500 feet. Like, you got to play Mike Ford. I know Mike Ford has problems, but you can't keep trotting Ty France out there to ground out 3 times a night. At best, sometimes he just strikes out. Why is Cabby playing so much? Why is Haggerty playing so much? You got to play Rojas pretty much every game down the stretch when you're trying to win. He's just a better player than Cabby. Why are you putting Munoz out there in non-save situations and then trying to give the save to somebody like Saucedo or Topa and just putting them in these weird situations they're not familiar with, and over again they fumble the game? So I don't know what to think of Scott. I thought he had a bad year, but it doesn't take away from the fact that he had good years the previous two. Maybe it was just a bad season, or maybe he's just a manager who is good for a mediocre team to overachieve, but he's not good for a good team that's trying to push to a championship level. That's possible. We've seen coaches like that before. We've seen managers like that before. Maybe he's just the wrong guy to take this team. Now, I don't know how good this roster is going to be next year. I don't. But I have a hard time believing that Scott got the most out of this roster. And then that gets you to the ownership. At the end of the day, the big picture here, and I know this video is really long, but I want to make one final Mariners video and then kind of end it until things start happening later on. The big picture, the failure of this season really stems to back in day one. Back on day number one, you're leaning on guys like Tommy La Stella, Cooper Hummel, and Colton Wong and AJ Pollock. Those guys represent the failure of this offseason and ultimately this team. You struck out on all four of those guys. None of them really gave you anything positive, especially Wong and Pollock. You were counting on those guys heavily, and they both gave you basically nothing. They were both basically useless players. So, Wong is a disaster at second base, not good in the field anymore, horrible at the plate. AJ Pollock can't hit anything, not really any kind of real presence at the plate. So you get to the trade deadline and you're like, okay, we need another second baseman and we need another outfielder. So you trade for Rojas and Canzone. And Rojas was an important part of us putting together a good August and having a chance to make the playoffs at all. And even Canzone had a couple of big hits, even though his bat eventually went to sleep. But you had to give up Sewald, your best bullpen pitcher, to do it. So, therefore, if you had signed a good second baseman and good situational outfielder in the offseason, you don't have to make the Rojas and Canzone trade, which means you get to keep Sewald and have those extra bats for the last couple months of the season. So it all comes from that, as far as I'm concerned, because if this team is able to keep Sewald and get quality production out of another second baseman and another outfielder / utility player, they're probably in. The margin is that thin. So at the end of the day, you were forced to make a trade to make your bullpen weaker. And while you had to make the trade, the reason why you had to make the trade was because you messed up in the offseason. So therefore, that's where I'm really looking right now. Obviously, there were a lot of other big picture things that didn't come through this season. Castillo wasn't dominant the way we were hoping. We had some injuries with the rotation. Teoscar didn't have a monster contract year like I was expecting. Julio struggled in the clutch at moments. Suarez fell off. All these other things that we're talking about. At the end of the day, I think we still get in. And maybe we get killed, but we would get in if we didn't have to make that trade. So ownership, do right this offseason. And that's all I need to say because Cal Riley said it better than I ever could. See you guys later.